And as promised, Congressman Dennis Kucinich, one of the few members of Congress who's actually speaking out about this, is here in our studios for more reaction. Congressman, so good to see you here in our studios. We're used to chatting on the Hill, so thank you so much for making it over here.
Thank you, Dina. It's great to be with you.
Let's get right into it. Your reaction to Mubarak's decision not to seek re-election, and also what role do you think the United States played in all of this?
Well, first of all, with respect to President Mubarak's statement that he's not going to seek re-election, actually, there's an election going on right now. It's a voice vote, and millions of Egyptian people are having their voice registered for profound and transformational change in their country. And I think that we need to take note of that.
Speaking about his statement, is this going to be enough, though, to keep the people off the streets?
Having watched very carefully, as many of us have, the events in the last few days, I would doubt very seriously it's going to be enough to quell the dissent that is percolating because of unemployment, because people want housing, they want a chance, young people in particular want a chance for better education. When you have a country such as Egypt that ranks about 137th in terms of per capita income of all the nations, you realize there's a disconnect between the technically savvy middle class that is out there on the streets and a lot of other people that are having just trouble making ends meet. So those are preconditions for the kind of revolt you see going on.
You've also said that it's not up to Washington, D.C. to decide what happens here, that, quote, we can best support the wishes of the Egyptian people by letting them take the fate of their country into their own hands and by refusing to manipulate this unprecedented grassroots movement for our interests. This is something that you had said earlier today. This is probably unlikely, but what if, hypothetically, the Egyptian people choose the Muslim Brotherhood as their form of government? What then?
Well, I think that this is time for Washington to make a reappraisal of their relationship to the Muslim and the Arab world, not just with respect to the events that are happening in Egypt, but to look across the board and to see that we're at a transformational moment in history. It's not up to the United States to pick the leaders of any country. And while I believe that in many respects we're still an indispensable nation for the purposes of helping people, we have to be very careful when our reach would try to tilt the balance in favor of one candidate or one group as opposed to another. We really cannot control the events in Egypt, even though every year the United States gives the country of Egypt about $2 billion, and about $1.3 billion goes to the military. But, you know, that doesn't necessarily buy us the ability to influence the outcome of this event.
So you're saying to the White House, to your colleagues, other lawmakers, hey, let's really look at the whole Middle East here. Let's make a change. But we have to consider that there's been a trend for a long time of Arab leaders saying one thing in public, you know, either condemning Israel or the United States, and doing a completely different thing in private, perhaps because they are getting so much money from the United States.
Well, I think what we're looking at right here is a challenge to autocracy, people's demand for democracy. And wherever leaders say one thing and do another, they're going to run into trouble with their people, because actually the objective circumstances that people have to live with, whether they have jobs or not, you know, whether they have access to food and shelter and possibilities for the future, those are things that resonate with people. You can't just keep showing people visions of what the future will be. They want something more, obviously, in Egypt. Now, with respect to Israel, I think it's very important that the United States stand by Israel. But the best way to protect Israel, I think, is for the United States to use its influence to open up communication with Arab and Muslim leaders, so that we have to recognize in this transformational moment that is happening in Egypt is an opportunity for us to take a new direction with our own policies. And I think that it can be a very positive development for the United States. But in the end, this really isn't about us. This is about the people of Egypt.
But considering the fact that there's not much of a difference in foreign policy between Democrats and Republicans, you are an exception. What if, again, this new government, whoever may be in charge, is not in line with U.S. foreign policy? It doesn't seem to shift that much along party lines. Domestically, yeah. In terms of foreign policy, not really.
Look, we need to have good relationships with all nations. We cannot spurn a country or a people because of the leaders they choose. We have to effect a rapprochement with Egypt if they happen to choose a government that is not particularly to our liking. We cannot pick the leaders of other nations. That is a dead end. We have to regard the right of people for self-determination everywhere. And this gives us an opportunity, I think, to show that we see the direction of history and that we're willing to not just accept the direction, accept the will of the people of Egypt, however it plays out, but at the same time, we understand that the repression that happened in Egypt has happened throughout the region.
That the U.S. supported, right?
Well, look, who's debating that? It's not debatable. The question is this not a time for us to reach towards the Arab and the Muslim world to find an opportunity for a real transformation? What happened in Tunisia affected Egypt. What's happening in Egypt will affect the region and could affect the world. So we have to see that this is a moment in history that America can reclaim its roots going back to our own revolution, which came through a desire for equality, for self-evident truths, and that people have a right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I mean, we believe this in America. So we have to also see that other people believe in freedom too. We cannot be the ones, however, who guide their choice. That's up to them. That's the essence of self-determination.
You know, it's interesting. Hillary Clinton was on CNN's program State of the Union over the weekend, and the host asked her, are you with Mubarak or are you with the protesters? Whose side is the U.S. on? And she said there's another choice, and that other choice is the Egyptian people. You seem to have a completely different take and say that the protesters are speaking for a majority of the Egyptian people. What is the disconnect there, very briefly?
Well, I think it's a nuance, not necessarily a disconnect, because it is appropriate for the United States government to be very careful so that it isn't seen as pushing or fomenting a revolution. That's not our job. We, in a sense, our official policy has to be that we're not taking sides. However, you know, some may perceive that we may be backing one or the other. What I'm saying is a little bit different. I'm saying that we need to witness what's happening. And what's happening is people are voting. They're voting with their voices by the millions in Egypt. We have to take note of that. And we also have to take note of it not only with respect to Egypt, but with respect to the broader, to the region and to the world, that this is a time for the United States to reevaluate its policy broadly and to reconnect or make new efforts to reach out to the Muslim and the Arab world for the purposes of working towards a broader framework for peace.
Who's ready to do that besides yourself, to really reevaluate foreign policy? Who's ready on the Hill?
I think that an event like this in Egypt changes everything. It changes the way everyone views things. If people are, you know, we'll get caught up in Washington and be able to come to some conclusions, but the truth of the matter is that it's the people in Egypt that are leading this. We're watching the events unfold. I think that in the Congress, there are many people already saying, look, we've got to get out of Iraq and Afghanistan. We have to pull back from the drone attacks in Pakistan. We have to be careful of attempts to destabilize the Iranian government. That we have to look for ways of trying to achieve security for Israel without being involved in promoting policies that make other people insecure.
Is this an opinion that transcends party lines, or is this strictly the Democrats or the Republicans?
I don't see this as being partisan anymore. I think we're at an historical pivot point here, where there's a transformation in the relationship between people, the governed, and the governors. And that we need to mind that very carefully. Actually, we're in an era where the nation state itself is beginning to wobble because of changes with electronic technology, social media, the ability of people to communicate around the government, under and above the government. All this changes everything. And so while we still need these structures for social interchange and economic interchange in a society, we have to be mindful that people are catching a rising tide of public aspirations for profound transformation. People feel it internally, and they want it expressed externally. This is a huge moment in the history of the world, and we should, instead of holding back this wave, I think that this is a time for us to not just witness the flow, but to go with it in terms of our own relationships with the rest of the world, in particular with the Muslim world and the Arab world.
It's going to be very interesting to see if we do go along with it. Congressman Kucinich, we really appreciate you coming here and, of course, bringing this issue to light and actually being one of the few lawmakers who's actually speaking out about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.